Hello everyone and welcome back to another Strategoi video. Ryan here with, I suppose, the conclusion to my little series, my mini series here of content where we cover the differences in the Warscrolls we've seen thus far between the three factions, Stormcast, Skaven, and Lumineth, where we've seen the most Warscrolls thus far. Unfortunately, we just got the Warcom article that told us exactly how they're releasing all the faction packs. And though I suppose from a content creator perspective, I'm okay with it dribbling out each day on the basis of which Grand Alliance you're in, I can imagine it's a little bit of a feel bad for the people that are in destruction or death that have to wait longer than those of us that play Order and Chaos armies. Hopefully you play a little bit of everything and you can kind of let you process things as they come out. But honestly, one day apart is not enough of a difference to, I think, make a huge difference if you play a few armies to really come to grips with everything. So I feel like they should have just released it all at once. But I get it. It's going to generate more like foot traffic on the website and whatever. Anyway, which means since that's coming out for the first time this time next week, so like Monday the 8th, that means we've got plenty of time to cover other Warscrolls. So once we're done with Lumineth today, if anyone wants me to take any of the Warscrolls we've seen, including Spearhead if you really want, but I'd prefer to stick to the ones that we know we have the full rule set for from the faction focuses, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see if I can make another one of these videos, because we got plenty of time to break things down before we start diving into what's functionally going to feel like a whole crap ton of Battletome reviews. But anyway, so today I'll be covering Lumineth, which is obviously the kind of namesake army of the channel, though anyone that's been following recently knows that we also have a strong Sylvaneth following, Soulblight, and we've also focused extensively on the other armies that Jonas and I play, such as Tzeentch and KO, and a little bit of Seraphon even, I guess. But at the end of the day, we're basically opening up to all content now. So we're going to be less only Order focused and more kind of just open to covering everything. So hopefully we've reached more of you guys with all the faction focuses, and we're really looking forward to boosting that signal and getting our content out to as many people as possible. In the meantime, before I forget, feel free to hit like, share, subscribe. And Jonas and I came up with the idea. We just saw each other yesterday at Worlds Teams, where we were just kind of walking around hanging out with people. We decided if anyone out there wants to like add timestamps to this, I'm sorry we don't get around to it. It's just if we had to choose between making more videos or less, and timestamps were the kind of deal breaker there, then we'd rather make more with no timestamps. But if any of you out there feel inclined to post it in the comments, we will copy and paste and put it in the description and add those timestamps. So anyway, let's get on to the content. So some ground rules, I've covered this already a few times, but we're only going to be covering Warscrolls that we've already seen, including rules we've already seen. So this does not include, I don't have any insider knowledge with the faction packs, unfortunately. Maybe one day if we get big enough. But anyway, so that means we're looking at them kind of in a vacuum. So I'm going to be looking at the improvements from 3rd edition to 4th edition relative to what we already know about the armies, and mostly just restricted to the Warscrolls and not looking at rules outside of those scrolls. I'm also only going to be looking at missile and melee output, so not really magic output, what kind of mortal damage you can do. I'm not even really concerned with ranges of those weapons. Of course, missile is here what I'm talking about. That doesn't mean that the differences, whether a unit got nerfed or buffed with missile or melee output, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've gotten worse. There's as the next point points out here, there's also value to be found in the non-output rules. And as I've mentioned a couple times before already, that includes movement shenanigans, power pairs with other units, buffs, techie options, all kinds of things, how tanky a unit is, which is something we could also quantify, like the missile melee output, but it's a little harder to, and it's a little less juicy, I suppose, of a topic to be kind of bringing up in a video. But I certainly plan on doing some more covering that stuff later on. I'm also assuming that points are proportionate to what they've roughly been. We have every reason to think, given the armies we've seen in the battle reports thus far, that points values for armies just AOS wide are going to be raised at least 10 to 20%, which means there's just going to be less stuff on the table. So, of course, with the units changing its function in the game, and how strong or weak it is now, and what it's meant to do. Is it meant to be a chaff unit? Is it meant to be a heavy hammer? Is it the kind of thing they're trying to discourage us from spamming too much? Then the points might change outside of the assuming that points are proportionate from what they've been in 3rd edition. But that's partly what we can assess with a video like this that's focusing mainly on the output, to at least quantify how much we would expect if nothing else changed about the Warscrolls, how much their value should change based off of how much they got buffed or nerfed. And finally, I'm only concerned here with their percentage in improvement. So if they got 25% better or 25% worse, that way we can compare all these, we can kind of see what the heroes are changing, how the monsters are changing, that kind of thing, relative to what they used to be, so that you could assume, well, GW seems to be tweaking heroes up or down by about this amount, 25%, whatever it might be, based off of the role they tend to play. And then I could use that kind of information to apply it to my own army that's not one of these 3 armies, or even to the other Warscrolls in these 3 armies that haven't been shown yet. It's obviously really good to know also what their actual gross output difference is. So like say against a 4-up save, they go from doing unexpected value of 4 wounds done and going to 7 or something. That would be obviously a 75% performance improvement. But that kind of 75% improvement is way more impressive on a unit that was already doing a lot to begin with. So the actual difference in the real world feels more substantial than, say, something that had only 1 wound expected and then goes up to 1.75. Not so impressive. Anyway, that's kind of the ground rules. Let's go ahead and get on into the Warscrolls. So as before, we're starting with kind of our basic troop. In this case, we don't need a Spearhead Warscroll for the Wardens, which I'm happy to say because it looks nice on screen. So what I'm going to do with each of these is show the Warscroll, obviously, ignoring most of the rules that don't have anything to do with their missile or melee output. Talk about what changed from the 3.0 version, and then we're going to look at a graph which is demonstrating the percentage improved or nerfed based on certain criteria from the 3rd edition going into the 4th. So you want to see this being a positive number and, being quite impressive. But anyway, let's talk about what changed. So, Wardens swapped their champions option, which was the champ was like a wizard, just like it was for Sentinels. So he didn't used to have a spear, a pike. He used to have like a blade, and the functional difference here is that we just have another guy who evidently is armed with the same exact weapon profile as these other guys. He's basically got 3-inch range. Of course, all units have 3-inch range now, but he's got it as well now, but isn't a wizard anymore. So, and then, of course, he's getting +1 attack on his profile because all champs are going to have that ability where they're getting +1 attack on their melee and missile profiles, which in this case actually resulted in them getting a slight buff, because as you see, they lost their +1 to wound when charged, which we'll cover in a second on the nerfs slide. This is the only looking at the things that got better when they're buffed. And then it's also worth pointing out that Power of Hish is now more restrictive. So let's cover this. So the base is the blue columns, and what you can see is that generally speaking, they got against a 6-up save. That's with the 6, 5, 4, 3, and 2 down or below. And then we skip for expected value average, meaning a flat average across all 5 of the different save values, assuming they're all equal. The blue is going to be how much better the new Wardens are compared to the old, which you can see is hovering somewhere around 4%. Not a very big difference. This is on their base profile. So where they were doing crit mortals, they still are, and we're not looking as if they got charged or not. If I'm not mistaken, that's not what we're looking at here. So Why did they get better? Well, even though that they lost the +1 to wound when charged, it's basically, even though that I don't think that's being taken into account into this calculation here, it's because the champ is benefiting from the +1 attack. It's just a small, subtle difference, and if you reinforce this unit, it would be even less, because then it would only be for one model out of 20 instead of one model out of 10. But yeah, the champ's profile before was basically the same as before. It just had a little rend popped on it, but now he's getting +1 attack, and that actually has a small advantage. Now, I mentioned in the orange column here that Power of Hish is going on. Now, it's worth saying for any unit that can use Power of Hish in Lumineth now, because it's a once per army ability as one of your facets of war, and no longer a spell that can be kind of like cast about in numerous places. I've heard a rumor, I don't know if it's true, that one of the Venari subfaction, the formation, allows you to do Power of Hish on one unit guaranteed every turn instead of having to choose something else or whatever, or how the system works. It still means you're only getting one Power of Hish, and as far as I've seen with the leaks, I don't think anyone's dishing out a second Power of Hish, but maybe I'm wrong. That would be cool, but what I mean by it being restricted is it used to be able to put on multiple units. And now it can only go on one, which means, though we're seeing a slight improvement with Power of Hish on not getting charged with the Wardens now, they are unfortunately only going to be able to do that with one of their units in your whole army. So I wouldn't get too psyched about the Power of Hish buff. So I would in general say that if they're not getting charged, the Wardens are in fact better in terms of output. That said, if they do get charged with their Wall of Blades rule that we see on the slide here, then they have a chance to trigger strike first, which of course means that they have a chance to kind of like the best. What did I say before? The best defense is a good offense, and are the other way around. If you strike first, you might be able to kill a few of the models that are coming in, and of course, if they charge you and all that stuff, maybe you're getting this, and then you're doing even more rend, and then you have less coming back at you. But it's just that the whole thing is different now. So let's take a look at the nerfs, the sad side of the story. Sorry again for the slide here. The 65432 in expected value average on the graph there, because we have one part that's a slight buff. That's where against a 2+ save, and you've got all of your buffs off. You got charged, and all of that. This is, both of these are assuming you got charged. Then you could come out a little bit better now with Power of Hish on, which is assumed in the max buffs. That said, most of it is a sad story here. So what are we seeing? Basically, this is the situation when you got charged. And because the old version of the unit also used to get +1 to wound, you're now actually worse in comparison to the old version of the unit when you get charged, despite the fact that the champion is a little bit better with +1 attack, even though, of course, they lost that rend. But you are, of course, getting the rend when you get charged, but that was always the case. And now you just don't get that +1 to wound. So on average, you're seeing about a 9% ish decrease in your output, maybe 8.5% decrease in your output, which gets a little bit better if you've got Power of Hish on, because Power of Hish does a little bit more work now for you. And like I said, against a 2+ save, you're technically poking above average there, but on average you're getting nerfed when getting charged. So the old version of the model of the kit was actually better. The unit was better when it was getting charged. Okay, let's move on. So now we're looking at Stoneguard. Stoneguard's actually a relatively simple story here. So what happened? They got +1 damage. They used to have a damage characteristic of 1. But they lost their mortal wounds, or mortal damage as we now call it, on 6s, which used to be buffed up to 5s with the spell, which is going to be my orange tier that we're seeing there. And the champ functionally got upgraded because the champ had 4 attacks but still had 1 damage. And now, if you know anything about how this works, 2 attacks, which we see now in the Warscroll with 2 damage, comes out to the same expected value because when they multiply, they're the same. As 4 attacks and 1 damage. However, 4 attacks and 1 damage is less swingy, and 2 attacks, 2 damage is more swingy. So in terms of their output, if they weren't getting any special buffs, and I didn't throw in the extra buff from the Avalenor because that's basically the same thing now. So we're just looking at the the base profile now. So even though they lost their mortal wounds because they doubled their damage, they actually are performing better against 6 plus, 5 plus, 4 plus, and 3 plus save, and only get worse on base, not using the spell, on a 2 plus, if it was a 2 plus save. On average, they're coming out about 25% better than they used to be. So that's great. And this is kind of telling the story that I've been pointing out in a couple of these videos about how GW seems to be trying to make units more stable even when they're just at their base status, meaning nothing has changed. They haven't gotten any buffs or anything. They're just being themselves. They tend to perform better out of the box, which is great. That's actually really great for especially competitive players that don't want to have to rely on swingy like things going off, like a spell in this case. But what did the spell used to do? Those mortal wounds that it were doing were always an addition, but they were triggered on 6s to hit, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check that real quick. There was, 6s to hit, and then the spell made it so that one unit got it on 5s to hit, in addition, doing those mortal wounds. Now, obviously we don't do mortal wounds at all anymore, but if they did have the spell off, then the current version of the unit was only better against the 6-up save, so the 4th edition version, I mean. It flattened out to being literally mathematically the same against a 5-up save, and then it increasingly got worse from a 4-up save or better, meaning on average it was about 10% worse across all saves. Now, of course, you could only put that spell on one unit. It's kind of the reverse of what I was just saying about Power of Hish now, where you can only put it on one unit. So, in a vacuum, it looks worse than it actually practically was, because if you had 2 big blocks of Stoneguard, only one of them were getting it anyway. And so that meant that if you look at what they were doing in the blue bars there, on average they were getting a 25% improvement from what they used to be. So one of your units, let's say we were doing a side-by-side comparison with the old 3rd edition where you had 2 big blocks of 10, one unit was on the spell with the 5s doing mortal wounds, and then the other one was just normal with 6s. And then you had just put them side by side and let them fight the exact same things, kind of in a virtual simulation or whatever. The new version of the base version of the unit that doesn't have the spell on it is actually performing on average 25% better than against all saves. And the other version is performing on average, the old version, 10% better, or at least it's a 10% a decrease that the current version would be. But ultimately, you're netting an improvement if you had 2 units and one got to use the spell and the other one didn't. And keep in mind, the spell wasn't guaranteed to go off. And again, that increases the stability. So I would ultimately say that Stoneguard have been improved, especially considering your unlimited spell of Speed of Hish to move these guys. They didn't get nerfed at all with that. They're still, because it just gives you 4 inches, which functionally is doing the same thing. So ultimately, I feel like these guys got buffed with output. Of course, their ward got a little bit worse, but we're not trying to weigh in all that stuff right now. All right. So moving on to our first actual Spearhead Warscroll here, we're looking at the Blade Lords. Lumineth gave in a bit of a complicated story. Fortunately, I didn't have to cover Dawnbringers in this video today, because that's one of the more complicated Warscrolls and computing all of their output possibilities. Oh, and something I meant to say also about the Stoneguard just a second ago was you could have mixed and matched the way that the hero was armed, like the champion in the unit. I just assumed from my calculations that he was armed exactly the same as the unit and got +1 attack or whatever it was. So technically there's more nuance in that story, but I just tried to keep it simple because it would have gotten way too out of hand for how much it was worth otherwise. But anyway, back to the Blade Lords. So they have 2 different profiles. Now, this is a Spearhead version of the Warscroll, but I think that we'll probably see, at least in terms of output, a very similar set of abilities. You have the 2 different poses, basically. You've got the Perfect Strike and Flurry of Blows. What the analysis we're going to see here is for Flurry of Blows, because Perfect Strike stayed exactly the same. So no change. It's still great, because it was always great. It's still doing mortal wounds on a 2+. Anyway. The Flurry, though, what happened? So the base profile used to be 2 attacks, so it got +1 attack. So independent of how many models you were against. Before, you used to only get that +1 attack if you were against 5 or more models, and if you were against 10, it would shoot up to 4 attacks. So basically, like I was just saying about the Stoneguard, you're basically already fighting against a 5 or more, you're getting that the same +1 to attack that you would have been had you been fighting against 5 or more models in the unit. So that's nice. That said, they did get -1 to wound to their attack profile there. But they gained +1 to rend against infantry. They kept the crit mortals, by the way. So they kind of, I would say overall they got buffed here, but let's look at the actual results. So if we look down at the chart, the blue is in the base situation where you're not getting the infantry +1 rend on the new version of the Warscroll, and the old version would be against 4 or fewer models. So you can see that we're getting around an average of about a 45% improvement on the output for the Blade Lords, which is fantastic. They were already a great unit, and now they're putting out even more work just on the base situation. Now, for the next two comparisons, the orange and the green, I did assuming that the new version of the Warscroll is going against infantry, which makes sense because if you're up against a unit that's got 5+ models, it's probably an infantry unit. It could be cav, but it's likely infantry. So you would be getting that +1 rend, and that's being compared to the old unit, the 3rd edition version, getting the +1 attack or +2 attacks with the green version. So orange with +1 attack. The new version is only worst against a 6-up save, but how often you go up against a 6, and then as the saves get better, it still improves its output. So it, on average, is about 10% better than the old version against 5 to 9 models. And then moving on to the green, against 10 or more models, again, still being infantry, almost definitely being infantry. There are very few cavalry units that get up to that many models, especially after they've lost a model or two. Then you are performing worse, except for against a 2-up save where you're performing exactly the same as the old version of the Warscroll. So what is this telling us? Well, this unit is still great. It got buffed against, it's actually, strangely enough, more elite units, and stayed the same with Perfect Strike, which I would actually argue was an improvement because mortal wounds are just not being given out quite as often as they used to be for like hero sniping and stuff like that. And you're still doing mortal wounds, of course, on the flurry of blows as well. And then even against 5 to 9 models, you're still doing decently better. So I'm a pretty big fan. And then maybe the non-spearhead version of the Warscroll will be even better, but it could just be it has something to do with the bodyguard role or something else. Okay, so, oh yeah, I forgot. That was without Power of Hysh. So let's look at the story with Power of Hysh, because this unit can receive it because it does do crit mortals. So with Power of Hysh on the base level, it's now up to like a 45% improvement. Let's go back. What was it before? It was at, it's about the same. And then with against 5 to 9, this is assuming both units are receiving Power of Hysh, by the way. Now remember, this unit was the only one that couldn't give it to themselves. They needed to rely on a Lord Regent or Lyrior Uthral to give it to them. But of course, that model was good at giving it out to like multiple units, so, and had like a +1 to cast or whatever. So it was a good power pair, obviously. And now, of course, like I said before, with the other units that can receive Power of Hysh, we're going to have to choose just one unit. So in a certain sense, that's nerfed. You'll see that the output here in orange against 5+ models is around a 5% improvement, so I think that's a little worse. And then it's about 20% drop on average for the 10+. Let's see, what was it before? On average, it was less than 20. So they're actually not as good with Power of Hysh. Like the old version of the unit received it better than the new version, let's put it that way. Okay, now we can move on. So Sentinels, sorry for the potato quality photo. I really wanted to put a Warscroll up here, and this is the first time I've broken my rule about not using a bootleggy kind of thing that GW didn't share. It is, of course, the Spearhead Warscroll, so it is what it is. Evidently, the Warscroll is not going to change all that much in Spearhead. So what changed here? Something similar to the Wardens is, of course, that the champ can actually use the main weapon now, which is the bow. So that actually improves the output quite a bit because now we've got, instead of 9 shots out of 10 models, we got 10 shots. And then he's getting +1 anyway if they have a champ, which I assume they will. So it actually goes up to 11, which is making a big difference. And, of course, the unit got, and I should have said this first, they all got +1 attack. which is like they're all in Halon, but in standing within 6 inches. So that's actually pretty cool. Obviously, if the old version was getting the Halon thing off, but I didn't include that in the equation here, the calculations, because you had to be within 6, and that's not really where Sentinels wanted to be standing. Now, they do get +1 attack, and they have the same profile as the aimed profile, which means 18 inches, and I don't know if we have any source of extending the range. But anyway, the big thing that changed is they traded their crit mortals for crit auto wounds, which of course can be power of Hisht, and we're going to look at, let's see, did I do, no, I've got all 3 of them on the screen right now. And like I said, the champ now shoots. Power of Hish is now restricted in the same way that it was for Warden, so only 1 unit is getting it per battle round, I guess. I don't remember exactly when you choose that, but yeah, that's maybe I should check real quick before I say anything extra. But anyway, what we can, while I'm checking, if we're looking at the 3 different scenarios here, those would be the base profile, so with no extra Power of Hish buff. And then Power of Hish for both, that's orange. And then just for like shits and gigs, I thought I would do Power of Hish on the old version of the unit because it was easier to guarantee that you were giving it out to more units versus this one just on its base. Because I thought that would actually be pretty interesting. Maybe I should have done that with the Wardens too. But the Wardens had enough information to kind of process anyway. Okay, so I'm coming back to the battle traits. I just pulled them up. Let's see. Power of Hish works by... You can only use this ability if you've not used any faceted award abilities this battle round. Pick a friendly Venari unit to be target. This is at the start of the battle round. The target's attacks score critical hits, yeah, for the rest of the battle round. So yeah, you have to choose it from the beginning. So anyway, it's not like when you use it. So you couldn't change the unit that's using it like in one turn and then whatever. That would have been stronger, I think. But anyway, so... if we're looking at the blue columns against for, different saves there, the expected value average is almost 100% improvement. It's like a 95% improvement, which is great. And that has mainly to do with the extra attacks that you're getting, I think. And then crit auto wound does something, it's not amazing, but it's not as good as the mortals. But again, we're starting to see those getting stripped out of, especially like highly iterable missile units, like ones with large amounts of models, so that it doesn't amplify. We're seeing some amount of mortal wounds with missile attacks now, but not on the same level scale that we used to. And then with Power of Hish, it goes down a bit because the old version of it, was doing the mortals on 5s instead of crit auto wounding. Which crit auto wounding is okay when your wound roll is a 4+, but it would it's just not the same. But still, your output, because of the double attacks, is still great at being about a 75-ish% improvement over what it used to be. And then, even if you don't Power of Hish this unit in 4th edition, but you compare it to the Power of Hished version of the unit in 3rd, it's still performing at around a 45% improved thing, and is only actually worse against a 2-up save. That just goes to show that adding those extra attacks really does a lot. Now, if I was comparing this to the Halon version, it would be worse across a lot of things because, they was getting the +2 attacks in that context. But to be fair, it was just really hard to get within 6 inches. So it wasn't something you could rely on every turn, especially considering this unit really wanted to be sniping. So overall, I actually think Sentinels are doing a great job. All right, so let's move on to their melee situation. So the champ now shoots instead of having like a melee weapon or whatever, which also means that the melee output mainly suffers just because the champ's output was where most of it was coming from. And that Power of Hish no longer affects their melee attacks, which it probably never should have in 3rd edition anyway. And you see that just across the board here, it's just nerfs. So on average, their melee output went down by about 45%. And if they had Power of Hish on them, you're comparing them to that, it went down by about 60%. But no one's really here for the melee stuff. Of course, this unit gets totally turned off when it's in combat. So, because it doesn't have shoot in combat. As it shouldn't, really. Okay, so let's move on to another shooting unit, the Huracan Windchargers. We saw this being played in the Expo game that we saw between Nicolas Tasson, I'm totally butchering his name there, and then the Skaven player. But anyway, Windchargers. So, in addition to getting an extra point of health, which is great, and remaining one of the faster units in the game, especially with the movement shenanigans that Huracan enables them to do, and Sevireth, I guess. The bow. So let's take a look at Missile first. They got +1 attack on their bows, but -1 to wound. But I would still take that anyway. And then they have shooting combat, which is great, and they what am I trying to say here? They totally blanking here. Oh, they still have the anti-ward thing. So anyway, if we look at the blue, we're looking at the missile profile. There's like an optical illusion that's going here that makes it look like the 0% like horizontal line is actually like slanted because of the decrease in the melee profile there. But anyway, I don't know if that's affecting all of you the same as it is me. But anyway, they got about a 9% improvement just straight across the board for their missile profile, which is cool. And they're tankier now, and they've got lots of great movement shenanigans. Now, in melee, they got nerfed because, the Rider it got -1 to wound, and their Rend got one worse. I think there was a point in history where the Rend was fantastic, like even better in melee than it was in shooting. But anyway, and the Mount got -2 to hit. He got real nerfed, but +1 to wound, which mathematically goes from, because if it was -2 to hit, it was a 3+, 4+, I guess. Let me double check that real quick. If that's the case, then it was 1236 of its output, like the filtering mechanism. Yeah, it was 3+, 4+, 1236, also with 2 attacks. And now it's at 5+, 3+, which is 2 times 4, so 8. So it went down 33% on the melee, on the mount alone. And then, like I said, the what's it called? The -1 to wound on the Rider also got worse. So, and especially the Rend, which is why we see a difference as it goes across the board there. Anyway, but these guys really aren't meant to be in combat, and their shooting got a little bit better. They're tankier now. I still think they've got a lot of value. Okay, Sevireth, the man himself, the fox himself, maybe I should say. Great unit. I'm curious to see what the generic versions of the Spirit of the Winds look like. Spirits of the Wind, I should say. I've put all 3 of the profiles on here, so Missile, Melee, and then Melee Max, which includes the Mortal Wound stuff. Now, the Missile, basically the only thing that changed, I mean, it got shooting combat, which is great. That is a buff. But he got +1 damage because it used to be D3, and now it's at least a guaranteed 1 plus D3, so 2 to 4, which is great. On average, 3. So if we look down at the blue, which is the missile profile, we're seeing a flat 50% improvement, which is exactly what you'd expect, going from average of 2 to 3 damage, and nothing else changed. Of course, the range got reduced, but I still think it's a great profile, especially considering it's shooting combat and all the movement shenanigans. Now, the melee stuff, you used to have like 2 different profiles that kind of got merged here. It's hard to do a side-by-side comparison of how many attacks, what precisely changed, but functionally, what we're seeing is buffs to the melee. Now, this is also taking into account the mortal wounds. Now, the difference here is that the mortal wounds that Sevireth used to do were if Sevireth charged. Now, I'm comparing the melee base here. The orange is looking at his new rampage that he's got, the Searing Desert Winds. It has nothing to do with whether he charged or not. So he can do it every single combat phase, period. You pick up to 3 different enemy units in combat to be the target. And then you're rolling a d3 for each. On a 2+, does an amount of mortal damage equal to the roll, and subtract 1 from wound rolls. It's a fantastic ability. So I included that in the melee base just all time. So the reason why he looks like he spikes so much here with the melee is that I'm assuming that he's getting this off every single time, whereas the old profile needed to have charged. That said, to be fair, he always had retreat and charge, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, and that, of course, more or less guaranteed you that you were getting a charge off if you were doing it. But, of course, you could say, well, what if someone countercharged you now? You didn't get the charge off for some reason now. You're still getting to use it. Like, if that was a thing maybe before that they got to charge you. Not too many armies had it, but some kind of charge in the your turn. It's a niche corner case. But anyway, it's probably more fair to compare him to the melee max. Now, I only compared, if I'm not mistaken, I only compared it against one different unit. Before, when he made the charge, he used to be able to do it to every unit that he got into combat with. That he was within 3 inches with, I believe. Yep. And then you rolled a 3 up. Now it's on a 2 up on a D3, which is a 3 up, right? But anyway, and you only pick 3 units. But the chance that you're in combat with more than 3 units is probably slim. So he's still performing better, which is the green bar, on I don't know why the expected ignore that green there. That must be a typo somewhere. I don't know what's going on with that one. That expected value average on the right has to be wrong. Let's go look at the Excel and see if we can figure out why. I found a reason to go look at the Excel every single one of these videos, because sometimes little things go wrong and then I catch them while I'm doing the thing. So here's Sevireth. There's no way that this is right. Let's see. Let's see. This chart, if we're looking at the bars, the green one. How is that possible? Let's see. Yeah, that's the difference between that one and that one. Let's see. Let's come back here. Curious. Sum of those. Oh, I see what happened. I see what happened. Oops. Let's see. If we drag that down there, that should upgrade it. Let's see. Does that work? Yeah, I see what happened. Now I got to check this. Oh, that was good. Good. I'm glad that was good. So now we see what it's supposed to be. So here's the update for everyone at home. See, sometimes little things happen in these Excel docs. It's actually around what you could have eyeballed anyway, that around a 10% difference on average. So let's go back to I got to flip this up and then go back. Oop. Here. Hopefully we're still recording. If not, then this is where I will have cut. Okay, so let's keep going here, guys. So moving on. The Cathallar and Stonemage, this is real easy. Just like with any of the other foot heroes, we weren't really meant to be looking at their melee profiles. But the Cathallar, who's not on screen because it's a Spearhead Warscroll, and I thought I would just show the nicer looking Warscroll here. +2 attacks, +1 to hit, -2 to wound. Ends up getting, as you can see in blue, 140% melee output, but hopefully you don't get her in combat anyway. The Stonemage went from D3 to 3 attacks, so functionally +1 attack, and it's guaranteed to be the highest of the D3, so that's great. But -1 to wound. The damage went from D3 to 2, which is more or less a side grade. It just means it's more consistent, less swingy, but same as expected value. And then the rend that he could get is not automatic, and it used to be given to him and then 1 unit standing around. But the ability more or less is kind of the same in terms of potential output. So the Stonemage, regardless of whether he got the buff off or not, is sitting around a 10-ish% improvement. But, who cares? Okay. Ellania and Ellathor. Here we get into the juicy stuff. All right, we're looking at the missile profile first. It should be said that the old version was not a profile. It was an ability that was once per game, and you chose a point a certain distance away. I think it was 12 inches. And then you wanted to line up as many units as possible, enemy units. And then you did an amount of damage, amount of mortal wounds on a basis of like a 2-up, I think, for each one of those units based off of which battle round it was. Now, it was once per game. You had to get it lined up just right. Obviously, your model had to be alive. And the weird thing is, of course, Battle Round 5 is the juiciest, but then maybe they don't have as many units that you can line up, or they've spread out a lot to go take objectives, or it probably had a really hard time lining up as many units as you needed. So now it's got an actual profile. 3 attacks, 2s to hit, 3s to wound, -2 D3, crit auto wound. You could technically power of fish it, but I wouldn't because the wound roll is already pretty good. So just let it do what it's doing. So like I said here, it's now a missile profile every turn, and the effectiveness was dependent on how many models you could line up and how late in the game. So this is a different kind of chart here, but it still shows roughly what we're talking about. This is not the output. It's the amount of units you would have to line up with a given save characteristic. Let's assume that they all have the same save. Obviously, if it's mixed, it's more complicated. in order to be better, for the old profile to be better. So the lower it gets, the stronger it was, because you wanted to have that you need less models. So let's take an example here. So if we're looking at, let's say, Battle Round 1. If you're going up let's say Battle Round 1 would be this blue column here, against a 4-up save, you would need, so that's what this is, 4-up save, you would need roughly 3 3/4 or something like that, somewhere between 3 and 4, rounding up to 4 models that you would, or units that you would have to line up for the old version to be like the same or better than what this is, what the new profile is. And that's just for one turn, right? So like you'd have to line it up with that much just to make it equivalent to one turn's worth of this, which probably means you're getting a few of these off, especially if you're not in the melee stance, right? Because if you're this unit now has 2 stances. The Ellania stands for better casting, and then the what's it called? And the ward, of course, and then the Ellathor stands for better melee output. But as far as I'm aware, the shooting, the shooting profile has nothing to do with the battle round anymore, or which stance you're in. And so if you're in the magic stance, you're less inclined to be in combat, which means even though it doesn't have shooting combat, you're probably not in combat. So, I see it as actually going to be putting out way more work than what the ability used to do. So another example would be, let's say, same thing, a 4+ save, you'd have to line up only less than 1 unit. So you automatically are better in Battle Round 5, let's say, this purple one, against, if you can just line it up against 1 unit. But that's, again, only against 1 shooting attempt in the new version of the Warscroll. So overall, it's just flat out better. It got better. Of course, the super swingy stuff is pretty cool, but and it could have spiked if you could magically line up 1,000,000 units in Battle Round 5 and your unit was still alive and all that stuff. But at that point, it's probably a win more kind of scenario, or it could be a big Hail Mary to like clear some stuff out. But remember, you're only doing max 5 damage against a unit anyway, so if it's some big old tanky unit of like a horde thing, you're not doing enough to make a dent. Okay, let's move on to the melee. So looking at the melee, we've got, first off, let's look at Ellania first. Because if you choose the Ellania stance, where the damage of Altieri doesn't get improved, then it's roughly equal to, she herself got -1 to wound, and then Ellathor's base stuff is +1 attack, but the Ren got 1 worse, but it's +2 damage per turn, but so it's at a fixed 2 damage. And then he wouldn't be adding anything in, I guess, because before he was always the amount of damage of the battle round you were in. So I guess it's not fair to say +2 damage per turn. It's only +2 damage per turn if you're choosing his profile. So maybe I should say that. But anyway, so that meant that if you are currently in the Ellania stance, as in the 4th edition Warscroll, in Battle Round, you're roughly like a souped up version of the old profile in Battle Round 1. And in Battle Round 2, you're like a slightly nerfed version, I think. And then from that point on, you're considerably worse. But, of course, at that point, you're probably trying to go ham with Ellathor. It's worth pointing out that we did lose the Moonbright Talons, which was the owl that's hanging out with them. Okay, so what does that mean? If we look at the chart down here, it's once again organized by battle round, and saves, but it now is back to the way we've always been looking at it. So if you're in battle round 1 and you're in the Ellathor stance, because I'm not looking at Ellania stance at this point, the Ellathor stance on battle round 1 is hovering around a 115 or so % improvement. And then if you compare to battle round 5, even on average, we're looking at about 37% improvement. But against a 2-up save even, it's still better than it once was. So ultimately, Ellathor stance is just doing a lot of work, and you're putting out a lot of, cool output here. And that shooting attack, of course, is doing more work too. So I'm really a big fan of this Warscroll. I think it's a bummer that it can't be taken in all armies anymore, but I don't know if anyone ever really took advantage of that before. And obviously, it's pretty sweet in Lumineth. So it's where it belongs, I guess. And our last and biggest boy is going to be Avalenor, We're going to look at his top bracket first, which is where he wasn't bracketed before. Now, before I even mention that, I should say that he's one of those unique monsters that brackets, that has always had an ability and still does, that if he's standing nearby a Stone Mage, he doesn't bracket. So we're going to look at the average bracket after this, but it should be said that 9 times out of 10, he's probably functioning on top bracket, and this is the one that counts. So what did we lose? We lost the Mortal Wounds in addition on the hammers. That's a bummer. The hammers did get +1 to wound, and their damage output is equal to their second bracket from before, so 4. But unfortunately, when it brackets on the attacks, which means that the damage got reduced, and the attacks, when they start going down to 4, it's hitting it on both sides of the equation, and it actually has a pretty nerfing effect. The hooves got -1 to hit, but +1 to wound, so they got monsterified, if you will. And you can see that when you're looking at the top bracket here, when he's not getting the +1 attack for standing still, which isn't guaranteed anymore, it's like a rampage, and it has to go off on a 2. It used to be guaranteed if you didn't charge, and now he still has to meet that requirement. But anyway, he's looking at, on average, around an 8-ish% decrease, and then with the +1 attack, it's also about 8-ish on average. They're pretty much equivalent, which is unfortunate that he got a little bit nerfed, but I think it's still a strong unit. It's obviously pretty tanky. It's buffing up your Alarith elf units to give them +1 attack, which is a great force multiplier. And getting to stay on your top bracket is really solid. So let's look at that average bracket, though. Just for those that haven't watched the other videos, what I did is I looked at over the total life cycle of Avalenor. So in 4th edition, which is easier to look at, the top 10 wounds he takes, the first 10 wounds, assuming each wound is lost at the same rate. The first 10 wounds he loses are at the better profile, and then the last 6 wounds are at the worst. Before it bracketed based off of, how old brackets used to work, or in 3rd edition, where they were kind of mostly forgiving at the beginning, and then they start to kind of fall off more quickly towards the end. If you did that, then you can see what his profile looks like now. He's actually better on the average bracket with a +1 attack. He's consistently better at roughly of like a 12 or so, 13% improvement. That's the orange bars. And then the reason we don't see anything on the expected value average for the blue is that when not getting the +1 attack, he, on the average bracket before, or for comparing both Warscrolls, he ends up being functionally the same. Now, what story is being told here? It once again goes back to my thing I've been saying about GW kind of trying to make Warscrolls consistently good. Now, this one's a little harder to kind of parse, but basically what it means is if your Stone Mage dies, and or if you don't take a Stone Mage, compared to what it would have been if your Stone Mage died before, or you didn't take a Stone Mage, your unit is actually better or the same as what he used to be. Meaning he's more stable without having to have all the externalities that are supporting the unit. And that's kind of cool. So I'm going to find out in a couple minutes here if this recorded well or not, but we are done. I forgot to mention his shooting attack. It stayed the same, so except its range got nerfed. Okay, but we're done with these videos. So, guys, I hope you really enjoyed it. I did. I like doing this kind of math. I like seeing what the differences are. I think there are lessons and takeaways to be had with this, and it really kind of like gives me, as a kind of mathy player, and someone who plays relatively competitively, a better feel for what's actually going on, how GW thinks, what we can actually say about the meta. You have some evidence to base your feelings on instead of just relying on hot or cold dice rolls and what you've experienced in your relatively low sample size of games. And I have a whole bunch of other tricks, math hammery tricks that I've used to help kind of analyze things, and I haven't had the time to make the videos, but I'm still planning on getting some more content out, especially now that we're on a roll. So thank you guys for joining us on this. If you know anyone else out there that loves the math hammer side of things or the evidence-based side of things, please refer them back to these videos. We'll interchange from regular strategy type videos, some covering rules in general, units in general, battle tomes, but also these kinds of videos for those people out there that find it interesting. So Until the next one, guys, don't forget to drop some suggestions for what kind of video you'd like to see me do as a follow up of just mishmash of random War Scrolls. And hit us hit us up in the Discord and all that stuff. We're almost at 3,000 views, which is amazing. Thank you. Please, put the word out there if you feel so inclined. And until the next time, Ryan out.